Okay, I think people can hear me. Okay, I thank you, everybody. My name is Doug Routley. I'm pleased to welcome you to our campaign update forum. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting throughout. All of us are throughout the traditional territories of the Ho'okaminam-speaking Coast Salish peoples, primarily, of course, the Snuneymuxw and Sunemus peoples. I'm very pleased to host this meeting, and it gives me a chance to reflect on what we've been doing over the last 3 years, as well as present to you some of our plans for 4 years going forward, should we be fortunate enough to form government again, and should I be fortunate enough to be your MLA again, which I have to say has been such a huge honor for all of these years to represent such a diverse set of communities. And just referring to that, I'd like to familiarize you with exactly how diverse this constituency is. There are 6 First Nations in the constituency. There are 6 local governments, 2 school districts. There are 6 ferry terminals, and a host of different organizations in all of those different communities. It's a lot of small communities, from very rural, the island communities of Gabriola, Thetis, Penelakut, to the urban south end of Nanaimo. The riding goes to up to 4th Street in Nanaimo, so it encompasses all of Harewood, all of the south end to the east of the Nickel Street going into Nanaimo, and then all the way down to the Lake Cowichan Highway in North Cowichan, just north of Duncan. So everything in between, Crofton, Chemainus, Ladysmith, Cedar, the list goes on. And along with that list is a list of different issues in each community. So it is a fantastically interesting place to represent, with different cultures and different realities. And also it happens to be the constituency with the second fewest number of second language speakers, which would suggest perhaps less diversity, but it also has double the representation of First Nations compared to the BC average. So quite an interesting place, geographically, demographically, and socially, economically, in every way, environmentally. So that's what we're here to discuss. But before I go any further, those are all the kind of areas of concern, I guess, geographically, and we talked about some of the subjects, but also I have to say what is the primary focus for everyone in the province, everyone in the country, perhaps everyone on the globe, is the COVID-19 pandemic and how we are coping with that. And, you know, I would like to obviously acknowledge the unbelievable leadership of Dr. Bonnie Henry, who has led this province to such successful outcomes because she's been trusted. And then secondly, to thank the people who primarily trusted her, the Premier, John Horgan, and the Health Minister, Adrian Dix, and the Finance Minister, Carol James, because the things that have been done have really saved lives. My own doctor was in tears actually talking about it. And so I really honor those people. I thank them for what they've been able to do. And thank you for the faith and support that British Columbians have given us at this time, because we were able to move forward with changes that really wouldn't have been considered otherwise had people not been so determined, you know, and vigilant and willing to make sacrifice and investment in each other. So thank you very much for that. I guess it's time to get started here, and I've got a little presentation for you. I want to thank my campaign manager, Sarah Miller, and campaign staff, and I want to acknowledge their great work in putting together this and other great elements of our campaign. I really appreciate the work. So I want to talk about the progress first that we've made in the last 3.5 years, and then we'll look at aspects of the platform, particularly those that I believe will be most beneficial to our communities and to you and your families. After the presentation, I'll be happy to take your questions and do my best to answer them. First of all, when we formed government 3.5 years ago now, we were faced with a long list of issues that needed attention, many of which had been ignored and underfunded for over a decade. Some of those issues include, of course, poverty. Poverty was and still is a huge issue throughout BC and in our communities. At the time we formed government, we had some of the worst child poverty in Canada, with 1 in every 5 children living in poverty. And that number jumped to 1 in every 2 children living in a single parent home. Overall, we had the second highest poverty rates in Canada. We were also the only province in Canada not to have a poverty reduction plan that sets targets and measures for reducing poverty. Housing was also a major issue, as we were years into a housing crisis that had been ignored by the previous government. Low vacancies, skyrocketing costs, rampant speculation, and foreign ownership added to these issues. We also know now that money laundering played a huge role in the inflationary housing crisis that faced all British Columbians, particularly in the Lower Mainland, but radiating out throughout the province in its effect. Healthcare, it covers so many areas, almost every single one of which needed repair. The BC Liberals had brought in Bills 19 and 29 in 2002, which essentially opened the doors for privatization of our health services, including senior care home staff and food and housekeeping services at health facilities. After 15 years, these bills had wreaked havoc on our system. Along with funding cuts and an overall lack of investments, our healthcare system was so far behind where it needed to be for our population and for our health needs. Bill 19 and 29, I have to say, led to the largest mass firing of women in Canadian history. 10,000 workers lost their jobs, and privatization led to contract flipping, which drove their wages even further down, and also forced them to work in multiple facilities to make a living. This seriously impaired our ability to address the COVID crisis in the beginning. We had a point where of people infected in senior care homes, 31% died. And that was at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was why we instituted the single site rule. And that cost money, but it was money well spent because it saved lives. There were also, of course, numerous environmental issues that needed to be addressed, the biggest of which was the need to develop a comprehensive plan to address climate change with targets set and funding to ensure we can meet those targets. We also had a number of other pressing issues, such as reconciliation with First Nations, childcare, the opioid crisis, and education, just to name a few. Here on the left, you can see a list of things that contribute to poverty rates, like things like low wages, high cost of living, and an overall lack of social spending. The BCNDP government put into place a comprehensive poverty reduction plan, legislated plan, which sets goals and targets to ensure we are always working towards a reduction of poverty. This plan informs every minister's planning. This plan ensures that services of government are coordinated as effectively and efficiently as possible to deliver the most support to those who are the most vulnerable, thereby lifting thousands, tens of thousands of people out of poverty in the past 3.5 years. We increased the minimum wage to better reflect the rise in the cost of living. We increased investments in post-secondary education and training, including the removal of student loan interest and expanded seats in high-demand trades. We implemented the Affordable Child Care Benefit and Space Reduction Fee Benefit. These alone have put over $9 million back into the pockets of families in this constituency. We also raised the wages of early childhood educators by $2 an hour and created funding opportunities for centers to expand and open new centers. This has resulted in over 400 new spaces in our constituency alone. We also launched a $10 a day pilot program. These are life-changing supports for families. We increased rental supplements for families and low-income seniors, helping more people maintain their housing with more money in their pockets. We have made the largest investment in affordable housing in BC's history. This has resulted in over 1,000 new affordable rentals from Nanaimo to Cowichan so far. We were the last province to still charge a tax for people to access basic health care. And under the BC Liberals, the MSP fees had doubled. We committed to eliminating this regressive tax, and we did, saving families up to $1,800 a year and individuals upwards of $900 a year. This equated to the single largest middle income tax break in the province's history. We did implement the employer's health tax, as is in every other province, except that ours is the lowest rate in the country. We have also increased funding to social programs such as food banks, the farmers market coupon program, and more. So now, how do we continue moving forward with reducing poverty? These are some of the steps that we will take. We will continue lowering costs for families with fee reductions, introducing the annual renter's rebate, lowering costs of ICBC by 40%, and just pausing. 3 years ago, ICBC lost $1.18 billion. This year, it broke even. This coming year, a rebate will be given. I am so impressed with what David Eby, our Attorney General, was able to do in turning around what he so famously described as the dumpster fire at ICBC. So we will give people a chance to get ahead, and to do that, recognizing that this period is so extraordinary and that the impacts have been so great on families, many of those impacts not addressed by some of the supports we've seen so far, like the federal CERB or other provincial programs. We're hearing from people who haven't been benefiting, and those who still need help, and there are in the many. So we are committing to a one-time $1,000 relief benefit to families and up to $500 for individuals. This benefit will help reach many people in our community who aren't able to qualify for those benefits I described. We will continue with investments in affordable housing through our Housing Hub programs, and we'll expand the role of this innovative team to partner with nonprofit and co-op housing providers to acquire and preserve existing rental housing. We'll also instruct the Housing Hub to look for new pathways to home ownership through rent-to-own or other equity building programs. So important for families who struggle in an environment of perhaps lower wages, but increasing and inflating housing costs. We will expand our $10 a day childcare program, which saves families on average $1,000 a month. Now, let's pause. Sarah, my dear friend and campaign manager, and I visited one of the pilot programs. It's in our riding in North Cowichan. And we talked to some of these parents. These are young parents who are saving $1,000 a month on top of the $1,800 they saved as a family with their MSP premiums being eliminated. This totals almost $14,000 in a year for a young family. That is life altering. That changes so much for a family, what they can do, what they can afford to invest in, and what they can afford to support for their children. And I couldn't be any more proud of any measure that has been taken. And one of the commitments we've made is that we will enshrine that the same way our healthcare is enshrined in legislation, we will enshrine publicly funded healthcare, or childcare, pardon me. We will provide more funding opportunities for training and education, as well as more programs that offer job growth in communities. And I'd like to now look at the progress we've made on housing so far. We've increased and expanded the foreign buyers tax and implemented the new speculation tax. This has put thousands of rentals back on the market, over 10,000 just in the Vancouver area. And it has generated $115 million to go towards building affordable housing. This has been a successful measure. We have invested in over 1,000 new affordable rentals from Nanaimo to Cowichan, with some already completed, over 700 completed or in various stages of construction. And included in that are hundreds of affordable units for seniors, families, and individuals who are low to middle income. Supportive housing to get people off the streets, and housing with supports for people with disabilities as well. We've invested in new shelter and transition housing. This includes funding for shelter places in Duncan, Ladysmith, and Nanaimo, and a 10-bed transitional bed for women and children fleeing violence, which is operated by the Nanaimo Youth and Family Society. We increased rental subsidies for low-income families and seniors to help them have better housing security. We have updated tenancy laws to better reflect the current landscape of housing. And recently, we announced a new navigation center for Nanaimo, which will be only the second in all of Canada. The center will offer 60 beds starting next spring and will help people get off the streets and into a supportive environment that is conducive to improving their lives. This is a model that has shown great success. What are the next steps in housing? We already talked about the increased investments and expansion of housing programs, but we are also, once again, promising that we will provide a $400 annual renters rebate, like the homeowners grant, but paid to renters. This was something that we promised in the last election. However, neither of the other parties agreed, and we were unable to get the votes needed to follow through. We will freeze rents till the end of 2021 and then cap the increase after that to help give struggling renters a break, capping that increase to the COLA, or cost of living adjustment. We will reduce construction costs to make homes more affordable. We'll bring down those costs for developers, and by doing that, we can bring down the cost of housing for people. We'll streamline and modernize housing construction by eliminating outdated parking minimums in projects close to public transit, develop a single window provincial permitting process, and work with communities to streamline approval processes at the local level. We are taking action to control the rise of strata insurance. We've begun tackling this problem already by closing loopholes in the Strata Insurance Act and beefing up regulatory powers. And we've tasked the BC Financial Services Authority to investigate and find new ways to help bring insurance costs down. If rates have not corrected by the end of 2021, we will develop a public strata insurance option similar to Saskatchewan. When we formed government, many aspects of our health system were at their breaking point. Thanks to increased investments and the excellent leadership of Adrian Dix, our health minister, and my dear friend, Adrian is such an extraordinary person. We have made progress on some important aspects of healthcare, including repealing Bills 19 and 29 to prevent further privatization of healthcare services. I have to stop now and read that again for myself. We repealed Bills 19 and 29. Bills 19 and 29, as I said, led to the firing of 10,000 workers, mostly women. That was the largest mass firing of women in Canadian history. They were fired from long-term care service. Contract flipping ensued, pushed their wages further down and standards down. They had to work in multi-facilities to make a living. When we came into government, 90% of senior care homes were not meeting the bare minimum care hour requirements. We have invested $548 million already to increase senior care home hours. So, pardon me, pardon me. We also implemented the change to a team-based primary healthcare model, including the creation of the primary and urgent care clinics and primary care networks. Nanaimo has received a new urgent care clinic and the island's first nurse practitioner-led clinic. And we recently announced a new primary care network that will be coming for Cowichan. We have increased investments in healthcare infrastructure, which has resulted in a new hospital being approved for Cowichan and a new ICU for Nanaimo Hospital. We increased surgeries and decreased wait times in the order of 40%. We also increased surgeries now to the point where we will be caught up and up to date on all surgeries, including those canceled during COVID, by February in the Island Health region. We increased diagnostics such as MRIs with a strategy that involves running the machines 24 hours a day and investing in additional machines, such as the one received by Nanaimo Hospital. It is so important. This is a bottleneck in our healthcare system, where government in the past, the BC Liberals, could make immediate savings by not operating those services, by saving money from diagnostics and privatizing some of those services. And that led to huge backlogs in our system. So we have taken a different approach, and we are investing in those machines, that technology, and the people to operate it in the public realm so that we can move this system effectively and efficiently forward. We've invested in more training seats for a variety of medical professions, and we've implemented a doctor and nurse recruitment strategy. As mentioned earlier, we also removed MSP premiums, and we decreased pharmacare deductibles. Moving forward in strengthening our healthcare system, we are committed to first addressing the ongoing pandemic by continuing to follow the experts and the science. We'll do that by hiring 7,000 new healthcare workers in long-term care and assisted living as part of our recovery plan. This will include priority training for those who have lost their jobs due to COVID, and includes paid training to make it more accessible as we use the role of government and public services to help create employment for those who have lost their jobs in other sectors, and thereby achieving the goals we have for our health system and having a thriving, healthy community. Seems to be everybody's goal, and we are determined. We launched the Hospital at Home program, which has been successful in other jurisdictions. It relieves pressure on our hospitals, allows for improved care in a home environment. While we still work on recruiting more doctors, we'll also launch BC's second medical school to further expand our healthcare workforce. This is a foundational step, and I'm very proud to be a part of announcing that. We will introduce a 10-year cancer plan, which includes a new cancer treatment center in Nanaimo that will provide more accessible treatment options closer to all of our homes. Keeping trained, qualified staff is critical for providing better care. We will develop a staffing retention strategy that provides workers in long-term care and assisted living with leveled up wages, similar to those for early childhood educators. And this will continue even after the pandemic ends. And it will restore provincial standards for wages, benefits, and working conditions that were cut by the BC Liberals. We'll expand publicly funded home care to provide better care and help with daily living, such as bathing, dressing, meal preparation, and more, expanding the scope and service so that people can stay in their homes for as long as safely possible. It will also improve continuity of care with seniors receiving visits from a more consistent group of care aides. Now, we are investing $1.6 billion, a COVID health investment, in order to achieve this. And as you can see on your screen, that's $374 million for public health measures. That is contract tracing, lab capacity, services to rural communities, and more, as you can see. $416 million for community and long-term care, which of course will cover the staffing increases that I spoke about, and the wage increase for the single site initiative, correcting what was done with Bill 19 and 29. And then $784 million for recovery and increased capacity, which will institute the programs that I spoke about, buy supplies, and hire those 7,000 extra healthcare workers. Now, I'd like to take a look at the progress we've made with the environment. By far, the biggest progress has been in implementing the Clean BC plan. This is the most ambitious climate plan in North America. It was developed alongside and with full participation of Dr. Andrew Weaver, at the time the leader of the Green Caucus. We are committed. There is much more work to do, but we are taking the steps that are necessary to achieve those goals, and we need to talk about that. We've expanded the rebates for zero emission vehicles, and we've legislated a complete phase out. In other words, by 2030, we are requiring that all cars sold, all passenger vehicles sold in BC be zero emission. Now, that sounds like simply an environmental step, but it is a market intervention, and it is to put BC at the front of the line when it comes to accessing the numbers and the newest models, the numbers of cars and newest models, because one of the biggest difficulties in transitioning our passenger vehicle fleet to electrified vehicles is access to those vehicles. Jurisdictions that take this step are at the front of the line because the automakers know they will have a market. And that is a really important step, both for accessing those vehicles, but for the economy and the environment as well. So I'm very proud of that step, and I think that was a very forward-looking step. We have set requirements for new buildings and retrofits to be more energy efficient and cleaner. Every new building constructed in BC must be net zero ready by 2032. And 2032 is a deadline date, but based on the experience of the City of Vancouver, when they moved their building code requirements to higher efficiency buildings, they did it in 5 stages. Once they introduced that, it didn't threaten new projects that were underway because there was a long margin, as this is a fairly long margin, but builders immediately jumped to the 3rd and 4th stages of that plan in order to be more competitive when their developments came on stream. So we fully expect that there will be early adoption of this measure by the building community, but it will also not interfere with projects that are underway. So that was, I think, another very important step. We set targets of reducing emissions by 40% by 2030, and that's just not setting targets, that's legislating targets. We are reducing emissions from waste by diverting more waste from landfills and reducing polluting emissions. We are also reducing pollution from industries, making them the cleanest in the world. And our Clean BC plan, again developed alongside Dr. Weaver, includes this measure and many programs and supports that will help our industries get there without impairing their competitiveness. In fact, increasing their competitiveness and their value. The next steps we are proposing to take in addressing environmental challenges, with heavy vehicles being a large and growing source of harmful emissions, it's essential that we move quickly to green up BC's industrial transportation. We will expand Clean BC's specialty use vehicle incentive program to get more trucks, buses, ports, airports, and marine vessels off fossil fuels. And of course, these steps cannot be achieved without a government willing to work with industry and the private sector. And of course we are, and we will work closely, as we already are, in achieving these goals, and we are very confident that BC will lead the way. We're also going to provide a new income-tested incentive on new and used zero-emission vehicles so that more people can get into the electric vehicle rebate program regardless of their income. This is a very important measure in terms of social and economic justice, as well as environmental integrity, because it shouldn't only be those who are privileged enough to buy electric vehicles, new vehicles now. Those who are struggling, families who are struggling, shouldn't be forced to have a greater footprint than they would want to. They want to participate in this great effort in our province to reduce emissions. And this allows those families access and the right to participate in that great project. We will also remove the PST on e-bikes. Now, being a cyclist, you'd think I'd be wildly crazy about that. But being a cyclist who's tired of being passed as I struggle up hills by people on e-bikes going about 40 kilometers faster than me per hour, I'm excited about the measure, but I encourage people, if they buy an e-bike and see me ahead of them, that they switch off and pedal up the darn hill yourself, okay? All right, enough said about that. We will also begin a complete phase out of single-use plastics province-wide, and that is a short sentence, but a huge measure. All of us know globally, locally, but particularly here on the coast, where we have a beautiful coastline threatened by plastic garbage, of which already my colleague Sheila Malcolmson has coordinated the removal of tens of thousands of tons of it. But it shouldn't be happening, and we have to start somewhere. So we are taking that step to begin a phase out, and I think it's one of the most important measures that any jurisdiction could take, and hopefully other Canadian jurisdictions will follow our lead. We will protect clean water in British Columbia by creating a watershed security strategy to plan, manage, and protect local watersheds for the public good. Now, there could not be a more important issue to islanders. And we live on an island where there's very little crown land. Most of our watersheds are owned privately, mostly by forest companies. They have been good stewards. We have clean water, but we need to protect that, particularly as we face challenges of climate change and growth. So we need to partner with communities, with those private landowners, with First Nations, and with stakeholders of all sorts to build this strategy and then adequately fund it, because it will also be used as part of our recovery. As part of the strategy, we're going to seek a partnership with the federal government to establish a watershed security fund to fund Indigenous, local, and regionally led clean water initiatives. This will create good, sustainable local jobs for British Columbians in watershed restoration, monitoring, technology, training, and education. We will become leaders in protecting the clean water supply, and we will lead others. We also will make sure that owners of large industrial projects are bonded moving forward, so that they, and not BC taxpayers, pay the full cost of environmental cleanup if their projects are abandoned. And I think we've probably all heard a number of the stories of abandoned sites, even some of our coastal communities with immediately waterfront properties where harmful pollutants are, as we speak, leaching into our environment. And that should not be the obligation of British Columbians. We have already provided the resources for those industries to thrive, and and we will make sure it is not the responsibility of taxpayers to pick up that dime. Lastly, it is important to mention that we will further our Clean BC targets by passing legislation requiring BC to reach net zero by 2050. This plan, endorsed by Andrew Weaver, formed in conjunction with the BCNDP government and being implemented now, will lead us to this goal, and must, because we all know this is the greatest challenge facing us over the long horizon, even in the face of our immediate COVID-19 challenge. We have done a lot of work also on reconciliation, but there's still a lot of work to do. As Chief Stuart Phillips said, reconciliation is not for wimps. And he was right. You know, the overlaps and conflicting interests and challenging collisions of interests that are created by the need to move to recognizing the governance, self-governance, and title of First Nations is a complex and vexing problem. But we need to trust our partners and see that we are ready as a government to meet the obligation we put on ourselves with the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. We have taken great steps to get there so far, but it is not simple. There is no homogeneous view in First Nations communities on any issue. And we must not, in any case, seek to speak for them or cherry pick those who simply support our positions. So we respect the challenge of reconciliation. And so far, we've taken steps that have, I think, been ground shaking and historic. We became the first jurisdiction, of course, to enshrine the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People into legislation. And this ensures that all government decisions going forward are done through a lens of reconciliation. The first paragraph of every minister's mandate letter contained that obligation. We signed a historic agreement to share gaming revenue with First Nations, which is but a tiny fraction of what has been taken from their lands and what we have an obligation to give back. But this will provide them with ongoing stable funding that can be used to help address the challenges that they face in their communities, that they can leverage to invest in infrastructure or any other purpose. Funding has already started flowing through this agreement, and it is changing the lives of thousands of First Nations citizens of British Columbia. We invested $50 million into language restoration. And I have to say, personally, that's touching my heart, because my grandfather left me a couple of books of notes, handwritten notes in his hand, that he took sitting on a front porch with Ed Elliott and Ernie Elliott, Cowichan elders, translating Hulkaminam words. And this is written in my grandfather's hand. I treasure that. And I was so happy to see us be committed to continuing and expanding that funding in this platform. It's an important step in reconciliation, as so many languages are near extinction. We became the first province to invest in on-reserve housing. We signed 2 historic agreements with the Nanaimo First Nation, one which includes the transfer of almost 3,000 hectares of land on Mount Benson and Mount McKay. There's lots more to do, but lots has been done. Next, I'd like to highlight some of the local investments that we've seen under our government. We have invested over $22 million into childcare just in the Nanaimo-Cowichan area, and that has resulted in 427 new spaces and over $9.5 million put back in the pockets of families in Nanaimo-North Cowichan. That is life-changing. We have invested in over 1,000 new affordable rentals from Nanaimo to Cowichan with a commitment to continue annual funding opportunities. And I am working with local governments on ongoing and planned projects. After years of promises and nothing done about Crofton Road, we approved and began construction that will see the road widened, reconstructed, completely resurfaced. This is a very important project to me because it was a source of great contention while I was in opposition. It was a campaign issue last time. I made the promise, and fortunately, our government has followed through, and I'm very thankful for that. We approved 18.8 million in seismic upgrades to schools in Nanaimo and approved $79 million to build a new Cowichan secondary school. And under the BC Liberals, schools only received playgrounds if parents could fundraise enough to cover the entire costs. The NDP, put in place an annual playground fund, which has resulted in 3 new accessible playgrounds in our riding. We have funded 2 new assertive community treatment teams, one in Nanaimo and one in Cowichan. These teams will provide flexible, individualized support excuse me, for adults with serious, complex, and often persistent mental health challenges that make it difficult to manage day-to-day activities. This is a tragedy in our streets that makes us all feel sad, and we recognize the tragedy, and it scares people because of the implications for our communities. Excuse me. It's so important that we make the investments to support our neighbors who find themselves without a home. Yes. We've invested over $35 million into Vancouver Island University, including replacing the Health and Science Center, expanding the Marine Automotive and Trades Complex, adding almost 1,400 new seats to high in-demand trades, and adding 40 new engineering diploma and certificate seats. We also contributed $3.3 million into developing the Arts and Heritage Hub at the waterfront in Ladysmith. Excuse me, I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about. Lastly, I want to talk about some of the aspects of our platform that I believe will most benefit our communities. To help address doctor shortages, we will launch BC's second medical school, and we will hire 7,000 new healthcare workers, with priority going to those whose jobs have been impacted by COVID. We will invest in complex care housing, which will provide an increased level of support, including more access to nurses and psychiatrists for BC's most vulnerable, who need more intensive care than supportive housing provides, including in places like the Riverview lands in Coquitlam, where the neighborhood welcomes the use of those lands for this purpose. Working with industry and labor, we will dedicate a specific portion of the annual allowable cut towards higher value producers who can demonstrate their ability to create new jobs for workers in BC. Working with C-SPAN, Point Hope, and other shipyards, we will leverage that work with long-term BC shipbuilding strategy to drive more global projects and create new jobs. We will develop a precarious work and gig economy strategy that will focus on developing employment standards targeted to precarious and gig economy workers, and and we will develop a government-backed collective benefit fund for independent contractors, the self-employed, and part-time workers, and expand access to a voluntarily pooled capital pension fund for workers who do not otherwise have coverage. It is a core value of mine and of the party I represent that all people should have pensions. And in our economy, where people are assembling a number of part-time jobs in order to make a living, those people deserve these benefits, and we will help provide them. In the same way that legislation was introduced to enshrine the concept of universal health care, we will protect the principles of affordable, accessible, and inclusive quality childcare in legislation. Now, this is a ground-shaking change, and in my entire career, I would have to say that that is the thing I would be most proud of looking back at, that my government would have created a system that will liberate people, and of course mostly women, to be able to participate fully in the economy, in their communities. It is in fact a human rights issue, but it's also a great economic tool, because we have a shortage of skilled workers. And even if you look towards Quebec, their childcare system is credited with the fact that they have the highest participation rate of women in the skilled trades. So this is an economic as well as social investment that is vital to our economy and our communities. We will deliver targeted investments to help make sure students have the classroom supplies that they need to succeed, so parents and teachers don't have to pay the full cost out of pocket. We will focus on local job creation. We will also take 1% of our GDP, $3 billion per year, and invest that in COVID recovery programs and projects. 52 were brought to government, 50 are being approved. We are selecting these projects with a lens of job creation, reconciliation, and climate change. And so we are investing in the people and the environment and the economy of the province. That's $3 billion a year for 3 years. And that is in addition to $23 billion of capital projects already planned, approved, or underway. So I'm very proud of those achievements. And I'd like to, in conclusion, thank everyone. I will turn on my video momentarily. There you go. And I want to thank you for joining me for this presentation and congratulate you if you've made it all the way through to the end. I really do appreciate it. But more than that, I'm incredibly honored to have served the diverse community that I described when we started this meeting. It's a huge honor to represent the people of Nanaimo-North Cowichan, this place that I grew up. And I love these communities, and I feel as though we went around for 3 terms, my first 3 terms in office, in opposition, promising people that we would do these things. If we were elected, we would reflect your values, your principles, with policy and programs, that you would come first, not the 1%, that we would fight for you, work for you. And I think we have. And I think the application of our values in this way has prepared us for what we face now that we're in this pandemic. We have addressed some of the needs beforehand, housing and employment needs, and we're going forward. We have been prepared in a way by what we've done already. And we are seeking another term, another mandate to do more. As John says, this is a great project and we want to continue this project, and with your support we will. And we will work for you and your family. You will come first. Finally, and I promise this is final, I want to share with you something that this is why I am most proud to be a member of the NDP, okay? And so indulge me with this. These are NDP firsts, right? MLAs. The first Black man, Emery Barnes, was the Speaker of the House. The first Black woman, Rosemary Brown. The first Chinese Canadian woman and Cabinet Minister, Jenny Kwan. The first Indo-Canadian man, Mosa Hoda. The first openly gay man, Tim Stevenson. The first openly gay woman, Jen McGinn. The first Métis woman and cabinet minister, Carol James. The first First Nations woman and cabinet minister, Melanie Mark, who grew up right here in Ladysmith. Korean Canadian, Jane Shin. First Taiwanese Canadian, Katrina Chen. First Filipino Canadian, Mabel Elmore. That makes me proud. This last cabinet was the first cabinet and the first caucus in Canada to be 50% female. This last caucus, 5 openly gay or bi members, including myself. 6 South Asian, 1 First Nation, 1 Métis, 1 Taiwanese Canadian, 1 Filipino Canadian, 2 Chinese Canadians. I know it's a list, but it means something. It means that we are trying to reflect you, your values, and we feel as though we should look like you. And we know the challenges that British Columbians face. So we want to help address those challenges and continue forward with what we've been doing. With your continued support, I stand ready to advocate, because I believe that in the end, my job is to facilitate, empower, and position people for success, either as an employer with my staff, as a representative of our communities. And the way I need to do that is to help bend policy to suit and serve my community, and not the other way around. Thanks. Now, you can ask questions through the Q&A function, and my friend Sarah will reflect those questions to me, and I will do my best to answer them.
Okay, while we wait, you can tell your story.
Can I tell my story?
You can tell your story.
Oh man, okay, I got to tell a story. Okay, so this is a person who I met in the bicycle industry. I had taught English in Japan and taught English to a bicycle maker. And when I came home, I imported his products. But when I was in that industry, I met a fellow named Tony Hoare. And Tony Hoare built the wheelchairs for Rick Hansen when he was a wheelchair athlete. And he was an incredible cyclist. He built bicycles in Vancouver, and we helped each other in business here and there. But Tony's history was that he was one of the first two British riders to complete the Tour de France. Now, Tony finished last. And when you finish last, you get a prize called the Lantern Rouge, the Red Lantern. And Tony always joked that he's the guy who spent the most time on his bicycle of anybody in the race. But he was a hero to me. He came to the Commonwealth Games in Vancouver and raced there. He won many, many professional bike races, but always vowed that he would retire in BC. And he did in Vancouver and became my friend. When Tony retired from his business there, he came to the Cowichan Valley, where well into his 80s, he was building trailers. He built trailers for homeless people that were like little tent trailers. They'd fold out to be a tent trailer at night, and then they'd fold back in and be a bin for canning or recycling during the day. He built trailers for disaster relief and won awards for design. He was such an extraordinary person, and he very unfortunately passed away this past year. But yeah, he's so extraordinary as a person, and I love telling his story. So Sarah said I could tell a story. So there you go. Tony Hoare was a wonderful person. Loved him dearly. So.
Okay, so we have a question.
Yeah.
How can I continue to support the NDP when they are supporting old growth logging?
Well, thank you for the question. In fact, I was a logger, and I worked in sawmill, and I've planted over 500,000 trees as a tree planter, and I've built houses. So I've handled that product from beginning to end. And all of us are concerned about our forests. To simply say that we can simply ban things would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be true. We simply have to do things in a way that will not completely bankrupt our province, not simply by pressuring the industry because they want to do a certain activity, but also our trade relationships. If we incur a trade loss that could be in the multi-billions of dollars, that would impact every British Columbian. So we share the goals to manage the forests as efficiently as possible in order to preserve them. And but we need to be creative. We actually had to pass 2 pieces of legislation just to give the minister the right to act in the public interest, if you can imagine. That's how badly the government had been hamstrung. And for 25 years, both the NDP and the Green Party campaigned saying that trade agreements would hamstring government's ability to regulate resource industries. And we were both right. So it takes creativity, and it's a very complex issue. Anyone who offers you a simple solution to it is selling you snake oil. It is a very complex and vexing problem, but it is one of the core problems, because not only is it our environment, but it is $14 billion in revenue to the province per year compared to $1 billion from oil and gas. And it's a renewable resource when it's managed properly. But I'm glad you asked that, particularly now, because just the other day, John Horgan committed to accepting the recommendations in whole from the old growth panel that we assembled. The first recommendation is at the bottom of your screen. Our first recommendation was to pass overarching legislation that commits us to shift our entire legislative and policy framework towards ecosystem health. And we will adopt these recommendations. You see the paradigm shift that John Horgan has committed to on your screen. All of those shifts in the way that we will view, manage, and value our forests. So I hope that that answer is information that you will benefit from. We want your support. We understand that not every decision that government makes is agreed to by everyone anytime. The process is about getting people together. When people talk about bringing First Nations to the table, there's a vastly varied viewpoint among First Nations on every issue, including this one. And so we need to be respectful. We need to bring everybody to the table. We've committed to protecting 353,000 hectares of old growth to begin with, as well as monument trees and the area around them. We are, of course, have committed to further discussions with all of those groups, and we will increase and diversify our response as we follow science and the will of communities, as well as our partner First Nations, who, of course, under our obligations, must be fully engaged.
Do you support increased investments to deal with homeless, and why?
Excuse me. Absolutely, I do. Why? Because it's absolutely the right thing to do ethically. And then why? Because it's the absolute best thing to do economically. And then why? Because it's the absolute right thing to do in terms of social justice and cohesion. I mean, it's tragic. And the opioid crisis is interlinked in that. We need to remember, as we view this problem, that over half of the people who died the previous year from opioid overdoses were in fact people who were working men, usually in their 40s, who had been prescribed opioids and then became addicted. What we see on our streets is a tragedy that's developed over about 20 years since I could go back to the federal government canceling transfer payments in the mid-90s. or the late 80s, and then restarting them in the mid 90s. But for 16 years, virtually nothing was done except the problem was made worse. In just 3 years, the BCNDP has built more housing than the BC Liberals did in 16 years. So you don't turn that around overnight. It's not a light switch. These projects take time to develop, and the problems that it's created take are equally difficult to solve. But we've proven that investing in people and providing these supports is successful and the best practice. And so we are going to invest in that, and we already have been with all the housing investments that I spoke about. We also created a standalone Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions that is addressing the problem, not only directly through the ministry, but also helping coordinate the services of other ministries to better care for people. As COVID has happened, shipping routes and supply chains have been broken. That also broke the drug supply. So the drug supply has become even more toxic. And our priority now is keeping people alive, getting them off the street, getting them into a situation where they can receive the help that they need. I mean, we look at homeless people on Gabriola. Gabriola, 1 in 65 people are homeless. That's a considerably higher ratio than even in Nanaimo. So this is a problem that is everywhere. We will deal with it by increasing supports, increasing training, increasing housing, and realigning the priorities of government. We were able to make all of these investments, and up until COVID, balance the budget, simply because we made different decisions, simply because we weren't giving tax breaks to the top 1% so they could have a tax-free yacht, as John Horgan says. No, we took the priorities of government and directed them towards the people and reducing costs for people. And now we have to do a better job, and increase what we've been doing to help bring people off the street, because homeless people aren't a thing. They're people without homes, and they're citizens. Rick Dolman told me once about this subject. He said, well, if I was running a railroad, I wouldn't invest all my money in the posh parlor car for the rich people. I'd look for the car with the squeakiest wheels that was holding the whole train speed down, and I'd take care of that car and the whole thing would roll better. And I love that analogy. So that's what we're trying to do. Long answer. Right.
Will you agree to lower the voter age to 16? I have seen so much interest by students and they are so intelligent. How would you answer the age question?
Well, as an old guy, I'd have to say that I obviously welcome the viewpoints of young people, and so does our government. So we have instructed, of course, already the Elections BC to register high school students as voters, so that that important and crucial step doesn't have to be taken as they enter this new world after graduation. Something that slips by the wayside, something that then doesn't happen in far too many cases. So that will help participation once students reach the current voting age. Personally, I would support it, but so far the position of the BCNDP is to register voters in high school, and I'm sure that there will be progress for young people, because young people are demanding it, and you have to do that. So the number one way to be effective is to vote, to vote. And so we encourage young people, particularly young people, to vote and vote for their future. So yeah, and you know what? Do I have time for one more? Okay, she says I have time for one. My favorite part of my job is when grade 5 students come down to the ledge. They're studying parliamentary democracy, and I tell them all about Jimmy Pattison, how rich he is and how fabulously wealthy, and all the companies he controls. Then I ask them, how many votes do you think he gets? And they say 500, 5,000, and I would say probably half dozen kids in 15 years have said one. And so then I'll tell them, no, he gets one. And that makes, at that moment that you cast your vote, you have a wallet that is rawly equal to Jimmy Patterson and everyone else. And I know there's some naivety and, you know, don't want to be Pollyannish or whatever, but it's true. And so, you know, it's a really important part of democracy. And also to go to young teenagers, someone from the other side, a BC Liberal, once told me that he had a high school group of students who came in and they were kind of bored with touring the building. So he said, hey, I'm really glad you all were here today because I wanted to get your opinion of the bill we just passed yesterday that raises the driving age to 18. And they all went, what are you talking about? He said, no, just kidding. But you see how important it is to be engaged. So it is absolutely important to engage people as quickly and as young as we can. So I agree with your premise. So far, we've done what we've done.
Okay, we'll do one more question. Someone's asked, this campaign must be different for you. What has been your favorite moment of this campaign?
Okay. Yeah, I can easily tell you that. And yeah, for sure. Okay, we started the campaign with a campaign forum like this on Zoom. And we did it in a little outbuilding in our backyard. And so we set up there, we had computers, camera, microphone, we were about to do a forum, and the internet went down in the little cabin. So we had to grab all our stuff and run across the lawn with about 2 minutes to spare, come back into the house, set up in the house, start up my computer, it starts downloading a bunch of updates. So then we had to switch to a different computer, and that computer failed. Then we had to switch to my phone. It was plugged into a cord that wasn't working. It died. So it was a pretty challenging event, but it's memorable, much in the way a kid's Christmas concert would be. But it was a lot of fun in its own way and very memorable. And I could say one other thing. When we had our virtual session where we were voting, if I wanted to vote yes, normally I'd hold up a white sheet like this. And if I wanted to vote no, you'd hold up with a black cross on your sheet. But every day there were more important votes where we all in the legislature would have had to stand to be counted. That's where that phrase comes from. When we did it virtually, the compromise was they could see my face say, I vote aye, and they could also hear me say it. So when it came my turn once, there were only 2 times things screwed up, and one of them was with me. It came my turn, I unmuted and I said, and they said, we can't hear you. The international sign for you're muted. It's a new thing with COVID. And so I tried to unmute, and I was unmuted, and I was panicking. They said, okay, we'll phone you on your cell phone. You look into the camera, give your vote and say it into your cell phone, which I did. I vote aye. The whole time I was getting texts on my phone saying, what's with the cat? What's with the pussycat? Is the pussycat part of your social media campaign? Because right above me, you can see over my shoulder, a cabinet, my cat was up there and it looked like he was sitting on my shoulder. So it was the most confusing thing. I was panicking over this technological glitch. We're gonna lose a vote. And I was getting cat memes from my colleagues. So anyway, that was memorable. Yeah. Anyways, I'm getting the cat sign from my colleague, Sarah, who's the campaign manager, and that means she's my boss. So I have to now say goodbye and end this meeting. And in doing that, I want to thank all of you and tell you this is my 5th campaign. I've served 4 terms, and I've had this incredible honor to serve the communities I grew up in that I appreciate so deeply. It's not been an easy road. A lot of the time, it's a very challenging thing to be involved in, but it's always incredibly rewarding to be entrusted with this honor. And I considered deeply whether I would seek office one more time or this time. And it was going around this province for 3 terms, promising people what we would do, and then getting a chance to do it, and now to stand on that record and to do more, particularly when it comes to forestry, is what motivates me, and to help you and your families. We get up every day, and we know who we work for. We work for you, and we work for your families, and we work for our beautiful province. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me and us for this meeting. Thanks Sarah for this incredible job she does. Thank everybody on the campaign, Pam, Karen, the cooling team, amazing people, Rick Flabishnig, Dave and the signs, all the people who are helping, all the people who phone. Thank you very much. You're doing a service to democracy at one of the times that we need it the most. And with that, thank you all so very much.